Kindly stand by everyone. We are about to start in just 7 minutes. And kindly share this paid webinar with your friends and colleagues. So we just want to inform you that we are now live streaming on YouTube. Once again, this is Alpha TV. Make me hashtag significantly better. All right. Good evening, Alpha Nation. Be ready and become hashtag significantly better through sustainable and accessible lifelong learning together. So tonight's episode is brought to you by our sponsors. But before that, so let me just introduce myself. I am Engineer Melanie Badrigal, the CMO of ASLEX PH Academy, and um it is my pride and honor to host this Alpha TV for tonight's session with our very special guest for tonight. So with that, all right. Our tonight's episode is made possible with the help of our supportive and generous partners. Of course, we have IXL CIE Review Center, so you can get an additional 500 off if you are a graduate of any Alpha Premium program. So that's IXL CIE Review Center. Next, we have Startup Podcast PH. Then to us, this is the first Filipino cloud-based analytics platform. So you can get free 90-day trial offer. You just need to visit their website at alpha2us.com for more updates. So again, good evening. So wait, may humabol. So we have Happy Hand with Sir Lex pala, guys. So we already have a podcast for this. So you can visit our podcast. So just search Happy Hand with Sir Lex. And of course, ayan, marami pa palang announcement, guys. We have things upcoming this 2025. First, we have Babae. So that's bringing awareness, building aspirations, and empowerment. So this is the second year of this event happening on March 30 na. So this is for celebrating Women's Month this March. Then next we have on April Tagumpay. This is for MSMEs. Then CPAG for productivity. August, this is Benhi for young professionals and fresh graduates. Then on September, we'll be having ALAB, which is the Alpha Leadership Acceleration Bootcamp. So it's open for students and professionals as well. And of course, on November, this is the biggest event of Alpha. That's the Philippine Latin Learning Conference. So fourth installment na po siya this year. And all right. So ayan. Again, good evening, Alpha Nation. And to all our team YouTube right now. So just a reminder, um, you are eligible to earn e-certificate. Just don't forget to fill out, of course, to finish this session. And I'll be sending the link and the QR code later. I'll flash it on the screen before we end the session. So, welcome again and ayan. Good evening, everyone, to our Alpha TV viewers in pursuit of knowledge and continuous improvement with ASLEX PH Academy. I am Engineer Melanie Madrigal. So, ayan. Without further ado, it is my pride and honor to introduce our guest speaker tonight. She is a seasoned legal expert. She's the director for regulatory and privacy at TALA and a data privacy council representative at NPC. With top tier credentials from UP and certification in information privacy, Attorney Bianca is here to break down the basic and help us navigate the digital world security. So let's give her a warm welcome. Hi, Attorney Bianca, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Engineer Melanie. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about data privacy and always in pursuit of your continuous improvement. So let me share my screen so we can get started. All right. Um, I hope everyone can see my screen. Again, thank you once again. My name is Bianca, and I am happy to share with you some basics of data privacy. Everyone can always use more knowledge on data privacy. And for those of you who have attended trainings before, I hope you will still learn something new or you will get refreshed on some privacy concepts. So for tonight's session, we will have three learning objectives. First is we want to know basic concepts of data privacy. So again, for those who have attended trainings before, hopefully this will be a helpful review for you. And hopefully after this session, you will be able to identify and explain basic concepts around data privacy as well as data privacy principles, and also your rights as data subjects. Our second learning objective is that we want you to be able to defend against privacy threats. So we want you to be able to identify common threats to data privacy in your day-to-day and also understand the steps that you need to take in case that your data is involved or exposed in a data breach or you are subject to a privacy violation. And the third learning objective is that we want you to be able to apply data privacy in your day to day. So we want you to be able to identify opportunities where your personal data is being processed and also how you can protect your personal data even as you go about your regular tasks in your day to day. With that, we have five parts to today's presentation prior to proceeding to our Q&A. So we'll just have a short introduction. We'll talk about some key data privacy concepts. We'll talk about data subject rights. We will go over data privacy principles. And finally, we will move on to practical applications of data privacy and data privacy concepts. So why is data privacy important? I hope you already have an idea, but as we know, as we move about our day to day, we see that everything really runs on data. So even if it's not something that feels like data processing, actually, you should be aware that your personal data is being processed by the different technologies and products and services that you use. So streaming, for example, for those of you who are very fond of using streaming platforms like Netflix, the way that they are able to recommend things that you might want to watch is because they have data about you and data about the shows that you have liked or watched in the past, and that's what they use to be able to recommend your next watch. Also, for your education, for those of you who are still students, your school needs a lot of data about you to be able to provide your grades, for example, or to be able to enroll you to your program. For those of you who are working or are employed, your employer will need also a lot of data about you to be able to process your payroll or even determine if you are qualified for your current role, qualified for maybe a promotion or your next role, or even to be able to pay out your mandatory benefits to the government. For those of us who use digital banks and e-wallets, which is most of us now, all our apps and financial service platforms require a lot of data to be able to process our transactions and even just to create our accounts on those platforms. For those who are very active on social media, always online, after all, the Philippines, I think, is the social media capital of the world. There's also a lot of data that's processed on those platforms for us to be able to create and maintain accounts, as well as for us to be able to connect with our friends and family and loved ones on those platforms, as well as, even people we don't personally know but follow. That does involve some sharing of and processing of our personal data as well. And of course, e-commerce for those who are frequent shoppers, especially on the double-digit sales. You know that the e-commerce platforms also collect a lot of information about you, and in order to process your orders, and also that is how they are able to recommend other purchases that you might be interested in. And then government benefits. We all have obligations to the government, and we are also reaping some of those benefits. And in order for us to be able to receive any of those benefits, we are required to submit some of our data. And actually, as we'll emphasize later on, government is actually the biggest processor of our personal information. And finally, elections. Of course, we also have elections coming up very soon. That also involves a lot of data processing because in the first place, we submitted a lot of information when we registered as voters, and that also will involve further processing as we head to the polling stations and vote for our next representatives. So really, in your day-to-day, you should be thinking about what are the different activities, what are the different platforms that I use that involve the processing of my personal information, and am I aware of the different forms of processing that's being performed on my personal information, and am I aware of how I can exercise my rights as a data subject with respect to the platform. So we'll learn about those concepts later on. And to help us, we need to do a review of certain key concepts around data privacy, starting with personal data. So what is personal data anyway? Under our Data Privacy Act, there are two types of personal data. The first is personal information, and the second is sensitive personal information. So first, personal information is defined as any information from which the identity of an individual is apparent or can be reasonably and directly determined. So that could be something like your full name. That is obviously you. Or if it's any information that when put together with other information, so there's a combination going on, would directly and certainly identify an individual. So for example, for the students that are here, maybe you have the same first name as another classmate of yours, but when put together, so let's say for example, Melanie, if there are two Melanies in one section, maybe there could be like a qualification of Melanie who is enrolled in this specific course or in this specific elective, and then that's only one. So that could specifically identify you, even though there could be several people with your same first name. That could still constitute personal information. The next category is sensitive personal information. So this is a category of personal data that is subject to stricter protections. And then we have certain categories that are specifically described in our privacy regulations, and you'll see them listed here on the screen. We have race, ethnic origin, marital status, age, color, and affiliations, whether religious, philosophical, or political. Another type of sensitive personal information would be health, education, genetic or sexual life related information. Also, criminal proceedings, whether these offenses are committed or alleged to have been committed. Also, government issued identifiers such as SSS number, TIN, health records, licenses, tax returns, and also other classes of data that are specified by law to be kept confidential. So those would fall within sensitive personal information. Again, personal information and sensitive personal information taken together would form personal data. So I hope that you already have an idea of what personal data is. The next concept that we'll be taking a look at is data subject. The data subject is the individual whose personal data is being processed. So that could be you. You are the data subject with respect to the businesses, the entities that process your personal data. Or if you run a business, that could be your customers or your patrons. Or if you're part of an organization, it could be your employees or your members, or it can refer to any other individual whose data is being processed. So now you know that with respect to any entity that processes your personal data, you are the data subject. Next concept, we have what we call the data controller or personal information controller. You will see this often abbreviated as PIC or PIC. So the PIC is the person or the entity who controls the processing of personal data. That's why it's called the data controller or personal information controller. And control is done by deciding on what information will be collected, as well as why or what are the purposes of the data collection and how or the means of processing of personal data. And what are some examples of personal information controllers or PICs that we typically encounter? As I mentioned earlier, government is actually the largest PIC or one of the largest PICs that you will ever encounter. You can only imagine the extent or the volume of personal information that government collects and processes, because that could be all the citizens and residents of a certain country, right? So that is a very big PIC, an example of a PIC. Another example could be an institution. So whether that is an educational institution, charitable institution, or other institution that processes personal information of students, members, etc. Another example is private companies. So again, for those of you who are employed, your employer, it could be a private company or institution, is the PIC with respect to your data as an employee. I will note here, there is an exclusion under our DPA or Data Privacy Act. It excludes any processing of personal data that is done by a person in connection with personal, family, or household affairs. In short, your parents are not PICs with respect to the personal information of the children. So that is excluded from the DPA. The next concept that we will be taking a look at is data processor, also called personal information processor or PIP. Now, this refers to a person or entity to whom the PIC, which we learned about earlier, may outsource or instruct the processing of personal data. So sometimes the PIC cannot do all of the processing on its own. It can outsource or delegate some of that processing to another entity, which is the entity that we call the PIP or personal information processor. So again, if we review our examples of the PICs earlier, our examples that we talked about earlier were government, institutions, and private companies. Examples of personal information processors or PIPs that these entities would typically deal with could be BPOs for customer service. So sometimes when you deal with, you have complaints that you want to file against one of the companies that you work with or a brand that you work with, if you weren't satisfied with the service, or maybe you just need some assistance with the services or the utilities that you're using, then sometimes they will outsource the customer service function to a BPO or a business process outsourcing company, or sometimes they're called call centers. Those entities would be acting as PIPs upon the instructions of the PIC. Other examples would be a payroll provider. So maybe your company cannot do the payroll processing on its own. It might require the assistance of companies that specialize in payroll processing. Then that payroll provider would be a PIP with respect to your company. Another example would be security agencies. So it's very typical when we enter a building or establishment or an office that there is a security guard at the entrance or in the lobby. And usually those security guards would be employed by security agencies, not directly by the company that owns the establishment or that manages the building. So it's also very typical for security agencies to act as PIPs on behalf of the company or organization that engaged their services. I hope that's clear with respect to who is the PIP. Okay, so now let's take a look at an example so we can see how it is practiced in real life, or how these characters or entities interact with one another in a real life example. So I think a lot of us use financial services like e-wallets. So in this example, we're just talking about an e-wallet account, e-wallet service. So think about your favorite financial service or e-wallet. The host, the provider of that service, is the company that is acting as the personal information controller or PIC. So that is the PIC. And then when we think about what is the personal data that could be processed, it can vary from company to company or from e-wallet to e-wallet, but typically that service will involve collection and processing of personal information like name, address, contact number. Sometimes they also ask if you're employed and what your employment background is or who your employer is. Sometimes they will also ask about your educational attainment. Now, what about sensitive personal information? Some of the sensitive personal information that may be collected in the course of your usage of the e-wallet could be birth date. And why is that? Because again, age falls within the list of data points that we consider sensitive personal information under the Data Privacy Act. So because your birth date, your full birth date, meaning month, date, and year, can be used to compute your age, then the full birth date is a sensitive personal information data point. Also, sometimes the e-wallet will ask about your SSS number, your TIN, or some other ID numbers. That would be sensitive personal information as well. Sometimes you will also get asked about your marital status, and again, that falls within the list of sensitive personal information. And then, do we deal with any personal information processors or PIPs? Sometimes, yes. So, for example, when we open an account through the app or the online interface of the financial service provider, sometimes they require assistance to verify your identity because they don't see you face to face. Unlike when you step into a bank branch where the employee of the bank can personally verify your identity, sometimes when we conduct transactions online, there has to be another step of verification to make sure that you are a living person and that you are the person who you say you are in your submission. So that would typically involve asking you to take a selfie, maybe asking you to take a photo of your ID. And usually, the processing of this verification step is done by another entity that is engaged by the financial service provider, and that entity specializes in identity verification. And in that case, that entity, the verification company, is the PIP or personal information processor acting on behalf of the PIC or upon the instructions of the PIC. And finally, of course, in this example, you as the account owner, account holder are the data subject. So I hope that is clear and that helps us understand the concepts that we have just reviewed. And we can now move on to data subject rights. So again, you are a data subject and you have these rights. So it's very important for you to be aware that you have these rights and that you can exercise them in order to protect your own privacy or also to to make sure that you are being respected by the different companies that you deal with. Also, for those of you who work for companies that process personal information, you need to remember that your customers, your patrons, other data subjects that you deal with also have these rights, and you should always consider how your customers, etc., can be able to exercise their rights, their data subject rights. So let's go through them one by one. First is the right to be informed. You have the right to be informed if your personal data is being processed, as well as to be provided information around who is conducting the processing, how is my information being processed, why is my information being processed. And this is usually done through the presentation of a privacy notice. So typically when we sign up for any service, we are presented with a privacy notice that informs us about all of these details. And that is how companies are able to respect our data privacy right to be informed. Or sometimes when you enter into an establishment, you might see posted on the wall or maybe at the reception desk a short privacy notice that provides you with these details so that your right to be informed will be respected by the entity or the establishment. The next one is right to access. So you have the right to access the contents of your personal information. So any company that holds records about you, even the government, for example, you have the right to access those records and you can reach out to the entity or that company to ask them for a copy or ask them to produce what information that entity holds about you. The next one is the right to object. So you can object to the processing of your personal data if the processing is based on your consent or the legitimate interest of the company. So if you gave consent in the past, then you can revoke that consent or withdraw that consent and ask the entity to stop the processing of your personal information. That is how you exercise the right to object. The right to erasure or blocking is next. This means that you can ask for the deletion of your personal data from live filing systems as well as backup filing systems of the entity based on certain grounds. The next one, we have the right to rectify or correct. So you can request the correction of your personal data in case there is any inaccuracy or error in the records of the entity that holds your personal information. The next one, we have the right to data portability, which means that you can ask the entity to produce a copy of your personal information and have it transmitted to another entity. So you could either request for the data to be sent to you and then you can transmit to the entity, or you can request the PIC to transmit it directly to the next entity. The next one is the right to indemnity. So you are eligible to receive damages in case you sustain any injury due to inaccurate, incomplete, outdated, false, unlawfully obtained, or unauthorized use of your personal data. So this does involve filing a case, but at the end, if the case is resolved in your favor, then you may be entitled to receive damages. And finally, you have the right to file a complaint with the NPC or the National Privacy Commission, which is the government institution that implements the Data Privacy Act, if you feel that your data privacy rights have been violated and the entity that's processing your data, whether the PIC or the PIP, is not respecting your data subject rights. So again, remember that you have these data subject rights and you can exercise them based on certain grounds. And in case the PIC or the PIP is not responding to you, is not listening to you, or refuses to allow you to exercise your data subject rights, then you can file a complaint with the National Privacy Commission or the NPC. Okay, we can move on to the data privacy principles. So we have three main data privacy principles under our DPA. They are transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality. So first, transparency means that the data subject must be clearly informed. So this should be in clear and plain language of the what we call the 5 Ws and 1 H. The who, what, why, when, and where, and why, as well as the how of personal data processing. Again, as we mentioned when we were talking about the right to be informed, this is usually done through providing a data privacy notice that contains all of this information. The next principle is legitimate purpose, which means that any processing of personal data must be for a declared and specific purpose. That purpose should also be provided in the privacy notice, and that purpose should not be contrary to law, morals, or public policy. And finally, the third one is the principle of proportionality. Sometimes we like to refer to this one as the Goldilocks principle because it's just right, meaning that the processing of personal data must be adequate, again, just right or Goldilocks, relevant, suitable, necessary, and not excessive in relation to the specified purpose. So as a data subject, next time you realize that, hey, my personal information is being processed, maybe you can pause to think about whether the three privacy principles were implemented by the entity that's processing your data. And for those of you who are connected with companies that process personal data, you should always be thinking about whether each processing activity complies with these three principles. Do we implement transparency? Do we implement legitimate purpose? And do we implement proportionality? With that, we can move on to practical applications because again, we want you to be able to not just to recognize privacy principles and privacy concepts in your day-to-day, but also to be able to implement what you have learned from this review session in your day-to-day. So, what are some of the common threats that we see today when it comes to protecting data privacy? A common one is what we call social engineering. A social engineering scheme is committed when a person or entity obtains information of another person through deception or fraud. So a common example of this is phishing. And we all need to be aware of social engineering schemes. And one way that we can protect ourselves from social engineering schemes and scammers that resort to social engineering is through using only the official communication channels of the entities that we deal with. And in case we encounter any social engineering scheme or attempt at social engineering, so any phishing attempt that is addressed to us, it would be helpful for us to report them to the authorities. And later on, we'll show how or where we can report these scams. So we need to be careful when it comes to social engineering because as we've seen, especially in a lot of the instances that have been documented in the news, scammers will try their best to obtain our personal data and confidential information through channels that appear legitimate. So these could be websites, apps, or other platforms that spoof the original, meaning they copy the original and make it appear so similar that it will be very, very difficult for you to be able to tell that it is a fake website instead of the original. This is why we have to be extra careful whenever we enter a website or type in a URL and really double check that we are accessing the correct website or we're using the correct app or we're messaging the correct account of the entity that we deal with. Scammers will also try sometimes to pose as officers or agents of a company that you maybe that you work with or a company whose services you use. Maybe they will pretend to be a representative from your utility provider, and then they will pretend that they will need to conduct a service call or service check. Or if you're employed, they may pretend to be an officer or even your boss or some other high-ranking representative in your company to make you reveal information that you should not be sharing with any external party. So that's why, again, we have to be very careful in checking that we are dealing with legitimate people. They will also typically use urgency as a tool to pressure their victims into divulging information. So these would typically be things like fake transactions. So um, we've detected a transaction on your account. In order to reverse the transaction, you need to provide this code, etc. Also, sometimes fake rewards or fake prizes or points that can expire. So again, be very careful when you hear this messaging because it is very commonly used by scammers, unfortunately. Another practical application for protecting our data privacy is to know where our personal data goes. So check at every instance if the PIC or personal information controller that you're dealing with is trustworthy. So earlier in the previous slide, we talked about scammers. So these are illegitimate individuals or entities that are posing as legitimate corporations. Now, sometimes even legitimate corporations or real corporations are not really trustworthy. So you have to make sure that, you know, do your due diligence on each company that you transact with or that you trust to process your data. Because as we note at the bottom of this slide, once data is shared with the wrong persons, it is almost impossible to get it back. So you really have to make sure that you understand how your personal data will be processed and how you can exercise your rights. So before you share your data, think about the different channels through which you would typically share your data. So this could be through a smartphone app that you download, or through a website that you access, or through a form that you fill up, whether that is an online form or a physical paper form that you fill up. So really, before you enter into these channels or before you engage with these channels and start sending your data or sharing your data through these channels, always pause to think about, hey, do I know who is processing my data? Do I have enough information about the PIC in this case, and is the PIC trustworthy? So always pause before you go and share your data. Another practical application is for us to take necessary actions to protect ourselves as well as our loved ones in case we fall victim to a scam or a data breach. So, some of the exercises that we can do in order to practice good data hygiene could be first to regularly check if our personal data or our login data or passwords, etc., had become part of a data breach in the past. So, there are certain websites that allow you to check in case your personal information has been part of a data breach or had been accessed by a third party or in an unfortunate incident, maybe even posted by a third party on the dark web. And an example of a website that does that service is haveibeenpwned.com. That is run by a reputable white hat hacker. So you can go and check in case your email or any other personal information had been exposed in previous data breaches. And in case your information had been exposed in a personal data breach or in the past, do your best to change your the information that can be changed. So for example, if an email has been exposed, you might want to make a new one and transfer your accounts to a new email address that is not part of a data breach or has not been compromised. At the very least, you should change your password. So make sure that your password is different now versus your password at the time that the breach occurred. And in all cases, you should always use strong, unique passwords for each of your accounts. Never recycle your passwords, especially if you maintain several online accounts, several banking accounts. Please use a different password for each one because once your password is exposed in any incident, then that helps to protect your other accounts from becoming compromised. Whereas if you use the same password across all of your accounts, in the event that that password is leaked or becomes part of a data breach incident, then that would also potentially expose all of your other accounts. So it's very, very important to please use unique passwords and strong passwords. I think the guidance is to make it at least 12 characters, use a mix of numbers and letters, make sure to include a symbol, a special character, and if possible, to use a passphrase, something that you would be able to recall. But for those of us who have trouble recalling so many different passwords, we can also use password managers. So it's highly recommended that we use password managers. Now we have built-in password managers on our different browsers. So if you use whichever browser you use, Safari, Google Chrome, etc., they do have built-in password managers that can help you save and keep track of your passwords in the browser. Please do not store your passwords in your Notes app on your phone or on your desktop. And also, please do not list your passwords in a notebook. So, um, hopefully that everyone remembers to do this, to always um, have unique passwords and, if possible, use a password manager, a secure one. And another application is to just simply do not overshare, whether that is intentional or unintentional. So always check the privacy settings of your social media accounts and the apps that you use. Make sure that you are aware who can see your data, because sometimes it depends on each post, whether we make a post public or accessible only to your friends or contacts or followers, or to a specific group of people, or a group of people that would exclude certain people, etc. So always be mindful of what the privacy settings are for your account as well as each post. And then also, you must regularly review your social media follower list or friend list. Please remove or exclude accounts that you do not recognize. If you're not sure, maybe you have a contact or a friend who changed their username and you have no idea who that is, you can always just message to confirm who that person is or who that account is before you unfriend or delete them. But it is better to be safe than sorry in this case, and you can always remove or exclude those accounts that you no longer recognize. And then be selective before you share any post or photo or story, etc., as you may be unaware or you may forget or not notice that they might contain excessive information or details that you did not intend to share. So if you want to take a photo or a story of, let's say, the coffee that you're drinking or the meal that you're having at a restaurant, make sure that there's no excessive personal information that is revealed in that post or photo. You might have missed that there's an ID on the table or your credit card was on the table when you took a photo of your drink or your food and you accidentally share the photo with all of those details exposed. Or even if you're asking for help or asking a question in a group, let's say a Facebook group or an online forum, and you're asking a question, your question has an attached photo. Again, you overshare accidentally any information that you do not intend to share, especially if it's anything related to your ID or any financial information and your credit cards, debit cards, etc. And also remember to delete or archive accounts that you no longer use. So maybe you were using a social media platform in the past. If possible, have it taken down versus leaving it out there at risk of getting taken over. And the difficult part of something that is inactive or something that you no longer use is you might not even notice that somebody has already logged in or accessed your account without your knowledge. And so it's better to just archive the account, or if you're open to it, then just delete the account. And then finally, remember to enable multi-factor authentication for all of your accounts. So this is not just recommended for your banking apps or your financial apps. You should also be enabling multi-factor authentication or MFA for your social media accounts and all your other accounts, especially your email, because these days we use our email a lot to log into other places. And this will help to prevent scammers from accessing your personal data, because even if there is a login attempt from somewhere, then if you have MFA in place, then there's an opportunity for you to prevent the login from being completed. And then this screen is just for those of you who are part of an organization. We will not be covering these in detail today. You will, in case you're interested to learn more about them, you may seek out trainings that are provided by the Privacy Commission or the Data Privacy Council, which I'm also a part of. And those trainings are conducted periodically, and later we'll show where you can watch for the announcements on when those trainings are conducted. But briefly, we can do a rundown of the list here. There is a framework that we refer to now as the 10 pointers for compliance, meaning for any entity or organization that is engaged in the processing of personal information, these are building blocks for your privacy program or components of your privacy compliance. And these are things that you need to make sure that you have in place if you are an entity or a person that conducts processing of personal information. So first is organizational governance, which refers to there has to be a delineation of roles within the organization on who is involved in processing personal data, and everyone who is involved in processing of personal data should be aware of their responsibilities with respect to that processing. And also, there should be awareness in the leadership of the organization, especially the board of directors, on what kinds of processing activities are being done by the organization, because there is accountability, or there should be accountability among the leadership, especially the board of directors of the organization. Next is the conduct of privacy impact assessments at the soonest possible time. It could be for the whole system of the company or for any new project or any change to a processing activity that the company wants to launch, or it could be on a per activity basis, the conduct of the PIA. This is a form of risk assessment that helps the organizations to determine what the risks might be with respect to data privacy that might arise from any sort of processing activity. Next is the privacy management program. So there has to be a structure around the different privacy management practices or privacy compliance practices that are implemented by the organization. And then those different components are typically captured in the next item, the document that we refer to as the privacy manual of the organization. Next is registration with the National Privacy Commission. And I'm sure those of us who go out will have seen these registration seals. So they look like keyholes with QR codes in them. So pretty sure if you've walked around in a mall or entered establishments like banks, restaurants, they will have those seals of registration posted at the entrance because it is a requirement for entities that process personal information to register with the NPC and also to display their seal of registration in a conspicuous place or in a publicly visible place. Next is a system for security incident management or personal data breach response. So every company or entity that processes personal information must have a process in place in case they suspect that a data breach has occurred in their system. And this process should allow them to assess whether a data breach occurred and whether they need to provide mandatory notification to the affected data subjects, the affected individuals, or the National Privacy Commission as well. And typically, the notification is done quickly because our Data Privacy Act requires notification to be provided within 72 hours from the discovery of the incident. So because the time frame is very small, 72 hours is very short, the company must already have those processes in place so that in case an incident happens, they will be able to just implement the process and meet the 72-hour deadline. There should also be submission of annual security incident reports and personal data breach reports, again, in the event that an incident happens that involves breach of personal data, then mandatory notifications and reports must be submitted by the company. Also, every registered entity, every company that's processing personal data is required to submit annual security incident reports to the Privacy Commission, regardless of whether a personal data breach happens. So even if in a given year, no data breach occurred or no security incident occurred in your organization, you are still required to report to the NPC and say, for the year, let's say 2024, our company encountered 0 security incidents. So I think it's a common misconception that if there's no security incident or no data breach, then my company doesn't have an obligation to report. That's not true. That is incorrect. The organization must still submit a report, even if the report is 0. Next, security measures. So every organization that's processing personal data must implement security measures. These include technical security measures that would typically involve the controls like firewalls, anti-malware, and also protection that are more IT in nature. Organizational, which typically refers to the policies and procedures as well as the accountability and leadership of the organization. And physical, for entities that process personal data that involve physical records. For example, there has to be security around the physical establishment where data is stored or data is processed or where the data backups are held. Next, we have data subject rights. We did discuss data subject rights earlier, and for organizations that process personal data, again, you must be able to implement and respect the data subject rights of the individuals who own the personal data that you process. And finally, the last item on the 10 pointers for compliance, we have the privacy principles, which we also talked about earlier: transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality. And again, any organization that is engaged in the processing of personal information must make sure that they implement these three privacy principles in every data processing activity. Finally, we have some resources that will be helpful for you to visit after this lecture so you can continue learning. The Facebook account of the National Privacy Commission is usually where they post announcements, including new issuances, new regulations, as well as training opportunities. So the Privacy Commission hosts its own training. They provide training on data privacy basics as well, um, sometimes in webinar form, sometimes in person. In any case, those trainings are usually announced on the social media pages of the National Privacy Commission. The Data Privacy Council, which is the private sector arm that works with the National Privacy Commission, also hosts trainings on behalf of the Privacy Commission, and those are also announced on the NPC webpage typically. Sometimes they're also sent out through email for those companies that have registered with the NPC. They can be communicated to the email addresses that were registered by the companies. Also, we have the website of the National Privacy Commission, which is privacy.gov.ph, which is where you will find all of the resources on quick guides for data privacy, as well as all of the issuances of the NPC. And also, there is a data privacy competency program, which hosts video format explainers of privacy concepts. So if you need further clarification on some of the privacy concepts that we discussed, or more examples on how we can implement privacy concepts and privacy principles, you can view those videos. They're very good. The videos are available in English, Filipino, and Bisaya, and they can be found on this link, or if you scan the QR code, that will take you to the YouTube channel of the Data Privacy Competency Program. And finally, we mentioned that in case you encounter any scam or there is an attempt to defraud you or any of your loved ones, we advise, well, first of all, ignore the scam, take the measures to protect yourselves and your loved ones. Do not share your information with the scammers, but also it will help the authorities to investigate these scammers, to root them out, and hopefully hold them to account if we do more reporting of these attempted scams or even successful scams. If unfortunately you were part of a scam, um, or you were victim of a scam, you can report the scam to these hotlines. This is the Interagency Response Center that investigates, well, that is the intake point for all reports, as well as that conducts further investigation around the entities that conducts these scams. So these hotlines will work for any concern regarding SIM card registration, cybersecurity, data privacy, cybercrime, and other ICT consumer protection concerns that you may have. And as indicated on the screen, the numbers can be reached free of charge. So I hope that you take a screenshot of this, or if you review the recording of this video, then you'll pause and share this hotline, these numbers to your loved ones, so that we will all be more aware that we have these hotlines and that we will be able to help the authorities to investigate and root out these scammers. So that is where I would like to end the presentation. I think we have some time for questions, if there are any questions. Let me check the chat. I don't see any questions in the chat. So,
All right. Thank you so much for that, attorney. And I guess I have received one question. This is a direct question from John Ferdinand. So this question is, what recommended ways are best for us students to help our loved ones, older generation, parents to exercise their data subject rights? Most especially, they already experience a social media account breach.
That is a very good question, and I'm sure a lot of us can relate, especially for those of us who have older members of the family in our household, and who are very active online. So our parents, our titos and titas, our lolos and lolas, etc. So the for any incident that had already occurred in the past, I would suggest that you can maximize any remedies that the platform may provide. So try reaching out to the platform as much as possible, and also reach out to the authorities. So we did share out the numbers that you can call to report those incidents. So hopefully they can help with the investigation and rooting out who the scammers might be for incidents that have already occurred in the past. But for the moving forward steps, we can share the practical applications that we learned about today. So start with, I think so, one good point that we can start with is making sure that our loved ones don't replicate passwords. I think it is a very common practice, especially for the older members of our household, to use the same password in every account. And as mentioned, that will place us in greater risk of getting compromised, because once one account is compromised and you have the same password for all of your accounts, then unfortunately that could lead to the compromise of all of your other accounts. So um, as best as you can, or you can share a recording of this video if you like, let them know that it is very risky to use the same password. And so to protect everybody involved, to protect any financial information, and also any savings, any amounts that they have in their financial accounts, they must make sure that they use unique passwords and turn on multi-factor authentication for all of the platforms. Again, not just banking apps, although you can prioritize banking apps first and then move on to social media after, but make sure that all of the accounts have those. So that those could be your to-dos, concrete steps that you can take as soon as possible to protect your household, your loved ones.
All right, totally agree with that, Attorney Bianca. So, ayan, we can
I think
share.
there's a
We have
oh
another
sorry,
question from
yes, there's
Madeline. All right,
a
how
question
does
in the chat is
anonymization? Sorry, what is that?
oh
It's a
yes,
personal.
how does anonymization help protect data privacy? This is an interesting question as well. So anonymization is when identifying features are removed from the data such that the data is no longer identifiable. And if it's something that is properly anonymized, meaning the identifying features are fully removed in a way that there is no way for the data to be made re-identifiable, um, that is actually no longer personal information. And that is already anonymized information, and meaning the rules of the that usually apply to personal data no longer apply to um, anonymized information. We do need to distinguish between anonymized and pseudonymized information. So pseudonymized information is when you assign a pseudonym or another value to replace the directly identifiable data. Um, but there is still a way to trace back what the identifiable data was if you have the key, or if you have the ledger where the pseudonymized or this where the pseudonyms came from. So in that case, pseudonymous data is still personal data. It's not anonymized because again, there's still a way to re-identify the data, but it is better to use pseudonymous data because they are indirect identifiers. In case it becomes subject of a breach, for example, it's harder to trace who the individuals are. And so it is more protective of privacy if we use a code name or a code number instead of the direct identifier.
Right, thank you so much for that. So do we have another questions, guys? I'm looking right now on our YouTube if we have other question there. All right. Miss Madeline say thank you. Thank you, Attorney
Yes, you're
Bianca.
welcome.
So we don't have questions on YouTube. All right. I think there's no more question. I think there's no more question from our participants. Again, thank you so much, everyone. And our evaluation form will be shared after some announcements. So again, thank you so much. And that was such a game-changing talk, Attorney Bianca. So you've definitely made us all think about how we handle our personal data. And with that, everyone, let's give her a virtual round of applause and we can use our comment section to say thanks to our guests for tonight. Again, thank you so much, Attorney Bianca, for that. So,
Thank you.
with that, I guess, can I request everyone to please open their cameras for our quick photo op? So let me just stop sharing so that I can see all of you. Great. Okay, let's just wait for others. Okay. One, two, three, smile. Another one. One, two, three, smile. All right. So, on behalf of everyone here tonight, thank you so much again, Attorney Bianca. So, our team will be contacting you for the token of appreciation. So, once again, um, I think can I ask um last lastly, so are some quick parting message to Attorney Bianca before we end this session tonight.
Yes, yes, of course. Again, thank you everybody for taking the time tonight to learn more about data privacy. I really hope that you learned something new, you learned some useful things that you can take with you in your day to day. And I hope that starting tomorrow, or maybe starting tonight, if it's not yet the end of your day, you can pause to think about how your data is processed in the different activities that you do, and also share all the useful information that you've learned with your loved ones so that you will all be better protected.
All right. Thank you so much for that. So, ayan. I will give some takeaways from that talk. So personal data is valuable. So we need to handle it with care and protect it at all costs. Next, consent matters. Always be aware of how your information is being collected and used, and be aware of data breaches. So we need to have strong passwords and security measures are like we need to set it first in line, of course, and know your rights. So, Attorney Bianca earlier gave us like eight rights that we need to practice. So, one of it is that we have the right to rectify our data that is already given. And again, Attorney Bianca, thank you for simplifying such complex yet important topic tonight. So, yeah, with that, let us wrap up everything. Again, tonight's event is made possible with the help of our supportive and generous sponsors. We have IXL CAE Review Center, Startup Podcast PH, To Us, and Kapi Han with Surlex. Next, we have, yeah, this is the Project Eskwela Juan. So you can join. this, we are looking for mentors who wants to share their knowledge and expertise. So you can just message us on our social media account if you are interested. Next, we have our online courses. So another way you can effectively learn and become hashtag significantly better with us is by enrolling now on our online courses and self-paced program. So we have our flagship course, which is Lean Six Sigma Yellow Belt Certification, Project Management Fundamental Certification, Certified Kaizen Professional or CKP, Certified Data Analyst, Lean Six Sigma Green Belt Certification Program, Lean Six Sigma Black Belt Certification Program, and our new courses. And of course, self-paced courses, we already have a lot of self-paced courses on our LMS right now. You can visit www.aslexph.com/courses if you want to know more about our self-paced courses. And of course, Alpha coins. So you can use this or for buying courses that we offer. And we have promo join as a group of 5, pay for only 4. So if meron kang friends or colleagues na gustong mag-take ng certain course with ASLEX, so you can join and may free na isang seat for you. And of course, ASLEX PH is still open for partners and ambassador. If you support our cause of promoting lifelong learning here in the Philippines, this is perfect for you. And you can visit ASLEX PH Academy Alumni Network if you want to be part of our community. And of course, here is our evaluation link right now. Make sure to fill out within 30 minutes after this session. Get your e-certificate. All right, let me just paste it as well on the comment section. So that would be all for this Alpha TV session. So we hate to say goodbye, but in every beginning, there is always an end. But don't be sad, everyone. We just hope to see you again next Friday, same time at 7 p.m. for another exciting topic of Alpha TV session or free webinar like this. So once again, this is Alpha TV making you hashtag significantly better. Stay safe, everyone, and good night.